The moment Shedeur Sanders heard his name connected to the Pro Bowl, something inside the Cleveland Browns organization snapped into focus. This wasn't supposed to happen this fast. Fifth-round quarterbacks aren't meant to skip steps. They're meant to sit, learn, survive, and maybe grow into something usable 2 or 3 years down the line. But Sanders didn't follow the script. He tore through it. And that single Pro Bowl nod didn't just validate a surprise breakout. It exposed a ticking clock Cleveland could no longer ignore. Because once a quarterback shows the league he's that guy, the timeline collapses. Patience becomes a liability. Development turns into urgency. Every decision suddenly gets filtered through one brutal question. Does this help him win right now? And when that question started echoing through the Browns' front office, it didn't just spark optimism, it triggered discomfort, hard conversations, and a ruthless reassessment of players who just weeks earlier felt safe. The Pro Bowl didn't crown Sanders, it forced Cleveland to choose a direction. That's where the story takes a sharp turn, because while fans were celebrating, insiders were quietly realizing something darker underneath the hype. This offense, the one Cleveland had been building piece by piece, wasn't actually designed for the quarterback they now had. Sanders isn't a rhythm-only passer. He doesn't live on short timing throws or safe, scripted progressions. He thrives when the field stretches, when defenses panic, when one snap can flip momentum entirely. And once that reality settled in, one uncomfortable truth became impossible to dodge. Not everyone around him fit the future anymore. And that's when Todd Monken entered the picture with a clarity that left no room for sentiment. Monken didn't see a roster full of good enough. He saw mismatches waiting to stall a franchise that had finally stumbled into a real window. The Pro Bowl wasn't a celebration, it was a warning flare. Either Cleveland leaned fully into what Sanders does best, or they risked becoming another team that wasted lightning in a bottle. And as that realization took hold, one player's status shifted overnight. Not because he failed, but because the game around him had changed. The Pro Bowl appearance wasn't just a flashy accolade for Shedeur Sanders, it was a hard reset on how the Cleveland Browns had to think about themselves. For years, this franchise lived comfortably in the gray area, not terrible enough to start over cleanly, not good enough to scare anyone. They drafted, developed, and hoped. Sanders shattered that rhythm in one season. And when his name landed in the Pro Bowl conversation, it sent a clear signal throughout the building. This rebuild just accelerated whether they were ready or not. Around the league, executives understand what that moment really means. A rookie quarterback earning that kind of recognition doesn't just exceed expectations, he changes leverage. He changes how fast ownership expects results. He changes how coaches are judged. Suddenly, you're no longer allowed to say next year. Windows open quietly, then slam shut even faster. And Cleveland, a team painfully familiar with missed windows, knew exactly what was at stake the second Sanders crossed that threshold. That's why this moment landed differently inside the front office. The Pro Bowl didn't feel like validation, it felt like pressure. Because once the league starts treating your quarterback as legitimate, opponents stop experimenting against you. Defensive coordinators prepare. Divisional rivals adjust, and every weakness around him gets magnified. Supporting cast flaws that were once acceptable become dangerous. Talent that doesn't elevate the quarterback starts holding him back. That reality hit Cleveland all at once.
What made it even more unsettling was how early it happened. Sanders wasn't supposed to be ahead of schedule, he was supposed to survive it. Instead, he showed poise under pressure, fearlessness in tight windows, and confidence launching throws most young quarterbacks won't even attempt. The Pro Bowl nod simply confirmed what film already hinted at. This wasn't luck, this was sustainable talent, and sustainability forces commitment. That's when the Browns' internal math changed. Developmental timelines got ripped down, long-term projects lost their safety net. Every offensive decision now had to support Sanders' strengths immediately, not someday. The question stopped being who deserves another chance and became who actually helps him win. And once that shift happened, the roster stopped being evaluated through loyalty or contracts, it was judged through acceleration. That's the part fans don't always see. The Pro Bowl reshaped Cleveland's identity before it reshaped the headlines. It quietly transformed patience into urgency and optimism into decisiveness, and it set the stage for moves that would have felt unthinkable just months earlier. Because when a quarterback arrives early, a franchise has two choices: slow him down to match the plan, or tear the plan apart to match him. Cleveland didn't hesitate, and what followed made it clear they weren't wasting this moment. What happened next had nothing to do with effort, attitude, or decline. That's the part that keeps getting lost in the noise. Jerry Judy didn't suddenly forget how to run routes. He didn't fall out of favor because of locker room tension or off-field antics. His issue was far colder than that. The ground shifted under him, and the offense he fit into no longer existed. Once Cleveland committed to building around Shedeur Sanders, Judy's role stopped making sense. Judy is a craftsman. His game lives in precision, sharp breaks, timed separation, controlled spacing between zones. He's at his best when a quarterback plays on rhythm, hits the top of a drop, and delivers the ball exactly where the route is designed to be. That skill set is valuable, just not in every system. And as the Browns leaned further into Sanders' strengths, that mismatch became impossible to ignore. Sanders doesn't play small. He stretches the field vertically. He invites chaos and punishes defenses that hesitate. His best moments come when protection isn't perfect, when plays extend, and when receivers turn speed and size into leverage. That kind of quarterback needs targets who can win late, win deep, and dominate one-on-one matchups when structure breaks down. And that's simply not the role Judy was built for. The film told the story before the stat sheet did. When plays broke down, Sanders looked elsewhere. When the ball needed to travel 30 or 40 yards in tight windows, chemistry wasn't automatic. It wasn't about trust, it was about trajectory. Judy doesn't consistently threaten safeties. He doesn't force coverage adjustments that reshape defensive spacing. His impact lives in small margins, while Sanders demands big ones. That's when clarity replaced comfort. Cleveland wasn't deciding whether Judy was good, they were deciding whether he was necessary for what came next. And the answer, quietly but firmly, was no. Once that conclusion formed, there was no dramatic fallout, no public criticism, no smear campaign, just a recognition that fit matters more than reputation. This wasn't rejection, it was realignment. The Browns weren't pushing Judy out because he failed. They were moving forward because the offense outgrew him. And in a league where timing is everything, that realization came fast. Because when you finally know what your quarterback is, can't keep players around hoping the system bends back toward them. You bend the roster toward the quarterback, or you fall behind. And Cleveland wasn't willing to hesitate. Once the Browns accepted that Shedeur Sanders wasn't just a pleasant surprise, but the actual axis of their future, Todd Monken stopped speaking in hypotheticals. This is where the conversation shifted from evaluation to execution. Monken doesn't build offenses that adjust over time. He builds them with intent, and more importantly, with boundaries. His system works because it draws a hard line between what fits and what doesn't. And once Sanders' playing style came into full focus, Monken made his position unmistakably clear. At the core of Monken's philosophy is vertical pressure, not occasional deep shots used as window dressing, but an offense that forces defenses to defend every blade of grass on every snap. He wants safeties uncomfortable, corners isolated, and linebackers frozen between responsibilities. That kind of stress doesn't come from safe throws or tidy spacing. It comes from speed, size, and the constant threat of the ball traveling a long way in a very short amount of time. If a receiver can't threaten that space, the entire structure weakens. This is where Monken draws his line in the sand. He doesn't believe in forcing skill sets into schemes where they don't naturally belong. If a receiver needs the offense to slow down, simplify, or compress, Monken moves on. He'd rather replace a familiar name than dilute an identity. That mindset isn't emotional, it's surgical, because every compromise you make to accommodate one player costs the quarterback a fraction of clarity, and fractions are the difference between good and elite. With Sanders, those margins matter even more. Monken sees a quarterback who thrives when the offense leans into aggression, when reads are fast but outcomes are explosive, when the reward justifies the risk.
And to sustain that style, the personnel must be aligned completely. Receivers need to win vertically, win physically, and stay dangerous even when plays break structure. That requirement narrows the pool quickly. So when people ask why Cleveland didn't try to make things work just a little longer, they're missing the point. Monken isn't interested in a little. He's interested in coherence. And once he recognized that the offense Sanders needs cannot be watered down, patience stopped being a virtue. It became an obstacle. This moment didn't come with a press conference or a soundbite. It came quietly, in film rooms and planning sessions, where Monken made it clear that the offense would move forward on its terms. Fit over familiarity, function over name value. And once that line was drawn, everything else became a question of who could keep up and who would be left behind. Once the blueprint was finalized, the search wasn't wide or speculative. It was precise. Cleveland wasn't hunting for a receiver. They were hunting for the receiver who naturally amplified what Shedeur Sanders already does at a high level. That's why one name kept surfacing in league chatter and internal discussions alike. Brian Thomas Jr. wasn't just a fit, he was the template. Thomas Jr. checks the boxes that matter in a vertical-first system. Size that forces defensive backs to play honest, speed that demands safety help, physicality that punishes hesitation. He doesn't need plays to be perfect to be effective. In fact, his value spikes when structure breaks down, when a quarterback extends, when coverage loses shape, when the ball needs to travel with conviction. That's where Thomas Jr. separates himself.
Production only tells part of the story, but even that part is loud. A rookie season pushing elite yardage and touchdown totals isn't common, especially on an offense that struggled to maintain consistency late in the year. Yet Thomas Jr. didn't disappear. He kept flipping field position. He kept forcing defenses to adjust. That kind of impact isn't accidental. It's transferable. What makes Cleveland especially confident, according to reports and league speculation, is that Thomas Jr. has already proven he can sync quickly with a quarterback who thrives in chaos. His college connection with Jaden Daniels wasn't built on scripted comfort. It was built on trust. Off-platform throws, tight windows, split-second decisions under pressure. That history doesn't guarantee chemistry with Sanders, but it offers something rare in NFL scouting: precedent. A real-world example of how Thomas Jr. operates when the quarterback plays fast and fearless. That's the difference between projection and proof. Cleveland isn't guessing how Thomas Jr. might adapt. They're studying how he already has, and when paired with Sanders' deep ball confidence and willingness to attack vertically, the logic becomes hard to ignore. This isn't about chasing numbers, it's about multiplying strengths. That's also why the rumored willingness to part with a first-round pick doesn't feel reckless inside the building. Draft picks are bets. Thomas Jr. is evidence. He's already shown he can stretch coverage, win late, and turn aggressive play calling into production. For a team operating on an accelerated timeline, certainty has value. In Monken's offense, wide receivers aren't complementary pieces, they're catalysts, and Thomas Jr. doesn't just fit that role, he defines it, which is why Cleveland's interest isn't quiet, cautious, or conditional, it's deliberate. Because when you finally know who your quarterback is, the right receiver doesn't just help him, he unlocks the entire system. From the outside, some people see Brian Thomas Jr.'s late-season dip in Jacksonville and hesitate. Inside NFL circles, that dip is viewed very differently, not as decline, but as disruption. And according to reports and league chatter, Cleveland sees that disruption as opportunity. A classic buy low window that doesn't come around often for receivers with elite physical tools and proven production. Jacksonville didn't suddenly lose faith in Thomas Jr. because he stopped creating separation or forgot how to attack defenses. What changed was the environment around him. Offensive structure became inconsistent, roles shifted weekly, and usage patterns stopped matching what he does best. Multiple analysts and insiders have pointed to coaching instability and scheme confusion as the driving factors, not performance. That distinction matters because it reframes the entire conversation. When an offense loses clarity, receivers feel it first.
Routes get layered instead of stretched. Reads slow down. Play calls stop feeding momentum. And for players like Thomas Jr., whose game thrives on rhythm and vertical intent, that kind of chaos doesn't just limit numbers, it suffocates impact. The explosiveness is still there, the separation is still there, but the system fails to unlock it. That's why Cleveland's interest isn't cautious, it's calculated. From their perspective, this isn't about rescuing a player, it's about extracting unrealized value from a broken situation. Change the environment, and the ceiling reappears. And because perception around Thomas Jr. softened late in the season, the price to acquire him may never be lower relative to his upside. This is where the buy low logic becomes dangerous for everyone else. Teams that hesitate see inconsistency. Cleveland sees suppressed potential. A receiver who already proved he can dominate coverage, win late, and turn aggressive play calling into production. Early, then got buried by structure rather than exposed by defenders. That's not a warning sign, it's a clue. And timing is everything. If Thomas Jr. had finished the year in a perfectly functioning offense, he'd be untouchable. Instead, Jacksonville's internal confusion may have created a narrow window where a premium talent becomes negotiable. That's the kind of inefficiency sharp front offices live for. For Cleveland, the context matters more than the box score. They aren't betting on a rebound, they're betting on alignment. A system that restores vertical intent, a quarterback who pushes the ball without hesitation, and an offensive coordinator who knows exactly how to weaponize speed and size. In that environment, the late-season noise fades fast. That's why this potential move feels less like a gamble and more like a correction. The talent never disappeared, it just got trapped in a situation that couldn't sustain it, and when chaos creates doubts, someone else gets leverage. Cleveland appears ready to use it before the rest of the league catches up. What's happening in Cleveland right now goes far beyond a single roster decision. This isn't just about Shedeur Sanders or whether Brian Thomas Jr. ends up in orange and brown. This is a cultural reset, one the Cleveland Browns have avoided for years because it required uncomfortable honesty, and that honesty has finally arrived. For a long time, Cleveland operated in survival mode. The goal wasn't dominance, it was competence. Keep things functional, avoid disaster, don't rock the boat. That mindset produced safe decisions, familiar names, and patience that often outlasted logic. But once Sanders forced the organization to confront what it suddenly had at quarterback, that safety blanket disappeared. You don't get to play it cautious anymore when a real window opens. That's the shift happening behind the scenes. Decisions are no longer being filtered through sentiment or fear of criticism. They're being judged by one standard. Does this elevate the quarterback now? Not eventually, not hypothetically, now. And once that standard was adopted, the tone inside the building changed immediately. Veteran comfort lost its protection. Reputation stopped carrying weight. If a role didn't align cleanly with the offensive vision, it became expendable, even if the player wasn't a liability. That's the part people struggle with. This isn't about cutting dead weight. It's about trimming anything that slows acceleration. And under this new philosophy, almost right might as well be wrong. Players feel that shift, coaches feel it, meetings get sharper, expectations rise, accountability stops being abstract and becomes operational. Every position group understands the same message. Production isn't enough if it doesn't translate to structure. If you don't fit the scheme cleanly, the scheme won't bend for you anymore. This mindset also signals something crucial to the locker room. Cleveland isn't hoping anymore, it's deciding. That clarity eliminates ambiguity, even when the decisions hurt, and paradoxically, that's when buy-in increases, because players know exactly where they stand. There's no guessing, no waiting, no vague promises about next season. It's a quiet but powerful transformation, one that turns a franchise from reactive to intentional. And once that line is crossed, there's no going back. The Browns aren't collecting talent anymore, they're constructing identity. And in this culture, fit beats familiarity every time, because the cost of slowing down a real quarterback is the one mistake this organization can't afford to make again. This isn't just a Cleveland story anymore. That's the part people are starting to realize. The moment the Browns began acting like Shedeur Sanders was the center of a win-now plan, the rest of the league took notice. Rival front offices don't just track transactions, they track intent. And what Cleveland is signaling right now is far more disruptive than a potential wide receiver trade. Across the AFC, teams are watching a franchise that used to hesitate suddenly move with purpose. That alone changes perception. The Browns aren't framing Sanders as a future project or a pleasant surprise anymore. They're treating him like a problem other teams will have to solve immediately. And when a team pivots that decisively around a young quarterback, it forces everyone else to recalibrate. Defensive coordinators especially feel it first. Vertical systems alter how entire game plans are built. Safeties can't cheat. Corners can't squat. Blitzes get riskier. Even teams that aren't playing Cleveland soon have to account for what this offense could become, because offenses like this don't just score, they reshape divisional dynamics. And that's why the rumored pursuit of Brian Thomas Jr. has ripple effects well beyond Ohio. Other franchises see the signal too. Cleveland is telling the league it won't waste a quarterback window out of habit or fear. That puts pressure on teams sitting in similar situations, clubs with young passers stuck between development and contention. Once one team chooses urgency over patience and commits fully, it quietly raises the bar for everyone else. There's also a deeper message being sent to the player market. Cleveland is no longer a landing spot where careers plateau or stall. It's becoming a destination that prioritizes fit, structure, and maximized production. That matters when agents advise players. That matters when veterans think about where they can win. And it matters when star players see a front office willing to be aggressive instead of comfortable. Even rival contenders are paying attention, because this kind of move doesn't come from desperation, it comes from conviction. Teams like Baltimore, Cincinnati, Buffalo, and Kansas City thrive on sustained identity. Cleveland is attempting to enter that category, not by copying blueprints, but by building one tailored to its quarterback. And that's why this moment lands differently around the league. The Browns aren't just upgrading talent, they're announcing a philosophical shift that turns them from a team others circled as manageable into one that demands real preparation. When a franchise finally commits to its quarterback with this level of urgency, the shockwaves aren't optional, they're inevitable. This story isn't really about a trade rumor or a wide receiver falling out of favor. It's about a franchise finally answering a question it's been avoiding for decades. The Cleveland Browns didn't just stumble into a quarterback, they stumbled into clarity. And once Shedeur Sanders proved he could carry expectations instead of shrinking under them, the Browns were forced to decide who they actually wanted to be. Choosing an identity is uncomfortable. It means admitting that some things you invested in no longer fit. It means letting go of players who aren't broken, just misaligned. Jerry Judy didn't fail in Cleveland. Cleveland moved past the version of itself that needed him. That distinction matters because it defines whether this moment feels cold or calculated. And what's happening right now is undeniably the latter. The Browns aren't chasing balance anymore. They aren't trying to please every philosophy or hedge against risk. They're building aggressively around what their quarterback does best and cutting away unnecessary weight. Anything that dilutes that purpose. That's how elite teams operate. Not by collecting talent, but by aligning it. Not by waiting for things to maybe work, but by deciding what will. If Brian Thomas Jr. becomes part of this plan, he won't just be another weapon. He'll be proof. Proof that Cleveland understands its window, trusts its evaluation, and is willing to act before opportunity slips away. And if that move doesn't happen, the philosophy still holds. The type of player they're searching for is no longer a mystery. The blueprint is set. That's why this moment feels different than past optimism. This isn't hope, this is intention. The Browns aren't asking whether Sanders can become the future, they're treating him like he already is one. And when a franchise finally commits with that level of confidence, everything changes. Rosters sharpen, expectations rise, the margin for excuses disappears. Now the question isn't whether Cleveland made the safe decision, it's whether they made the right one. because teams that choose clarity over comfort don't always get instant reward, but they do get direction. And for the first time in a long time, the Browns aren't wandering toward the next chapter, they're writing it.